Hi everyone, so this is day 9 lecture for sexual behaviors. Sexual behaviors itself may not be a social problem because it's very natural and very required for the reproduction of the human beings. However, if it is related with some social problems such as the poverty, or the higher chance of the health risks or violence, it may be some related with the social problems if those sexual behaviors are related with those social problems. So I will cover what are some sexual behaviors and the trends of sexual behaviors in the US and see what are the social problems related with the sexual behaviors in the current United States. So the 1960s were a time of the sexual behavior changes because of the sexual revolution, we call it. And there were changes in the American sexual behaviors because of the birth control pills, preventing them from the fear or unintended pregnancy in the rate of the unintended pregnancy. And hippie culture struck the U.S. as the emphasis on the free love, and it encouraged some counterculture activities such as having some free sex with many partners and using drugs and having many types of sex. The trend was reversed after having some high rate of the HIV and AIDS from those free sex activities during the 1980s, but still the United States have some less conservative views about the sexual behaviors compared with those of 1960s or before. So extramarital and teenager sex. So only small portion of the people think those extramarital and teenager sex are totally wrong at all, because partly because of the impact of the sexual revolution. So as you can see, the younger generations, so these are the birth cohort, so the later parts are the younger generations, and you can see they had a higher proportion of the teenager sexes in the later generations. So you can see US became less conservative after the sexual revolution in 1960s. So attitude toward the heterosexuality. So we are not covering about the homosexuality because it was covered in the previous chapters. And we may think the majority of people think that adultery, such as extramarital sex and teenage sex, are wrong. But in reality, about 53% of the Americans think premarital sex is not wrong at all. So more people think that premarital sex is not wrong at all. And Americans have different level of acceptance of premarital sex naturally. So women, older and more religious people are more likely to disapprove the premarital sex. So I'm covering about the sexual behaviors of the young Americans because they are sexually active and represent some large proportion of the sexually active population in the US. So there are some you may think that there are some differences in the sexual behaviors, such as males are more active and females are passive, but in terms of the sexual behaviors, they don't have many differences. I mean, they have little differences in the having heterosexual activities or vaginal intercourse or other sexes, but any same-sex behavior, females are more likely to have the same-sex behavior than men, about 3 times higher the quantities. So you can see that even though there are many big differences between the sexual behaviors between the females and males, but exceptionally, any same-sex behavior, females have higher chance of the same-sex behavior. And more religious Americans are more likely to have fewer number of sexual partners. So very religious people has 0 or only 1 sexual partner, but slightly religious people or not at all religious people are more likely to have 1 or 2 or more sexual partners compared with the very religious people. So there are social problems related with the sexual behaviors. So teenage sex and teenage pregnancy is the first part of the social problem. So about 41% of the high school students reported that they had sexual intercourse in their high school period. So in the most recent report, about most of the girls and boys used the contraception, usually condom, when they had the sexual activities. So we can see that about the sexual activity of the teenagers. They didn't have the sex because it's against religion and morals. So we can see the sexual education or their morality and other religious belief control the sexual behavior compared with other regions, like being pregnant or having not met the right person yet or something. So still, some sexual educations preventing the early or teenage sex for the morals or religions are still effective in the preventing or reducing the number of the premarital sexes or pregnancies. So there are various social issues about the teenage pregnancy. So premarital sex is not like a pure thing to be very negative or naturally criticized from others, but many of the teenager pregnancies are unplanned. So this is a problem because it has some like a higher proportion of unplanned pregnancies result in abortion a lot, and they have so because they are pregnant in the very young age compared with the 20s or 30s, they have the higher risk of the health problems such as high blood pressure, anemia, and early labor, which are very dangerous for both mothers and the infants. So they have higher rate of the drop of the school, and higher proportion of the pregnancy happens from the poor and near poor families. So dropping out of school and growing in the poor family and even higher chance of the leaving the family result in the higher poverty level of the young mothers and the young children from the young mothers. So they have a higher level of the risks such as the physical or behavioral and the developmental problems. So trends of the teenage pregnancy. So the U.S. has the higher rate of the teenage pregnancy compared with other countries, especially the Western democracies. So it reached the peak in the 1990s, but declined generally. So because of the drop in the sexes in the teenage and increased the proportion of the contraceptive use, we have some shorter or lower level of the teenage pregnancy, but still US have very high teenage pregnancy compared with other countries. So as I mentioned before, poor and near poor families are exposed to the greater risk of the becoming teenager pregnancy or that becoming teenage mothers. So in terms of the race and ethnicity, African Americans and Latina have higher chance of the teenage pregnancy, and South area or South regions has the higher teenage pregnancy than the rest of the U.S. So it's a little bit very paradox or ironical because southern regions are more likely to have the stronger religious beliefs, but it's also contributed by the lack of the safe sex education and low proportion of the contraceptive uses by the Planned Parenthood contribute at high pregnancy rate in the southern area. So it's very ironical that southern area, I mean the southern states of the United States, have the higher religiosity, but they opposed to the education, I mean the safe sex education and the Planned Parenthood. So this is very irony of the political orientation and the sexual behaviors in the southern area. So there are many chances of the sexually transmitted diseases. I will call it STD from head, and higher rate of the STD than other Western countries in the U.S. So about 15% of the young adults have an STD, at least one STD, and 20% of young women and 10% of young men have STD, and 34% of the African Americans, and 15% of Hispanic, and 10% of the whites and Asians had STD. And having multiple sexual partners and not using the contraceptive sex with the partner have STD has a higher chance of the having STD naturally. Yeah, I know it's dry, but it's about the content of the sexual behaviors. So, as I mentioned before, the teenage pregnancy have many risks. So reducing the teenage pregnancies would be helpful for the health of the young mothers and or some like a social class or other outcomes or school performances for the young woman. So use the harm reduction strategy. So help reduce the risk of the pregnancy among sexually active teens and help teenage mothers and their children. So sex education should be very effective for the using the effective contraception and consistent usage of the contraceptive methods. So also the early childhood intervention, such as providing the counseling for the poor children who are in danger of the higher chance of the teenage pregnancy, would be very helpful to have their emotional and behavioral health. So helping the teen mothers. So provide immediate help for the teenage mothers would be very helpful, such as second chance homes for the community for the unmarried teen mothers maternity group. So they have the teenage mothers have a higher chance of leaving their family because their family don't like it and criticize them, and they have like a very small or low resources of the support, so they have a higher chance of leaving their family. So even though there are some debates about the worth of the second chance home, because some scholars insist that having the second chance home is not very useful for the mothers, teenage mothers, but still it's very valuable resource for the teenage mothers because they are usually from the poor families and they leave their families in the higher chance. So it's very important that improve their conditions of the disadvantaged communities. So abortion is another part of the social problem related to sexual behavior. So abortion has been widely practiced in the many history or in many countries. So many illegal abortions were often risky and contributed to the high rate of the maternal mortality rate. So in 1973, by the Roe Wade decision, women are allowed to have some legal abortion in many states during the first trimester, which are through 1 through 3 months of the pregnancy, and conditionally allowed for the abortion during the second trimester, which are like 3 months through 6 months old in the period. So it helped many mothers from the risk of the illegal abortions, but still because of the Planned Parenthood v. Casey Supreme Court decision weakened the Roe because it banned abortions around the end of the second trimester, about 22 through 23 weeks old. So still we have some various measures make abortion more difficult because in some states they have some like strict rules of abortion that they have to meet the OB-GYNs sometimes, and they have to like ultrasound to prove that those pregnancies are very harmful for the mother. So there are large supports for the abortions which are very helpful for the mothers. So for example, if the mother has like a health deficiencies makes the pregnancy very risky, about most of the states are very supportive to that abortion. But in some parts of abortion, like they just want to have abortion because of the economical problem or something, the Medicaid do not pay for that, and then there are many bans of the abortions. So there are many problems. So abortion declined in the recent days because of the dropped rate of the unwanted pregnancies and declined in the facilities provide abortions because of the new law induced in there. So the abortion is highest in the Northeast and the lowest in the Midwest, but it can be accounted for some on the prevalence, or I mean the frequency, or the facilities of the abortions. So only 13% of U.S. counties have abortion provider, which is very low. So various variations of the abortion rate may stem from the distribution of the abortion providers. That abortion providers may be distributed in the Northeast more compared with the abortion providers in the Midwest. So there are some like regional or facility changes or differences in the United States. So public views. So public tend to have some strong views toward abortion because sometimes they think that abortion is kind of murder, but sometimes they think that abortion is the right of the woman to control their body or to control their pregnancy. So largely supportive for the abortion due to health problems, but relatively weak support for the problems such as family planning. So for the issues as the mothers don't want to have the children because they already have many children, or have low income or unmarried woman and wanting the abortion for any reasons, they are not very supportive to the those abortions. So naturally, more religious people are more likely to oppose abortions, and highly educated, liberal, or Western or Northeast residents have higher support for the legal abortions. So it is very important to have the safe abortions and reduce abortions in the illegal ways. So abortions are like protecting women from the dangers from the illegal abortions, and helping mothers avoid the risky, illegal, and dangerous abortions is very important. And providing more funding to the Planned Parenthood activities and education will be very helpful because it will reduce them like unplanned pregnancies. And support for the abortion by low-income people and low-class social women would be very helpful because of the very restrictive regulation for the abortions. Low-income people who have the lower resources would have used the ways of the illegal abortions. So we may need to have some support for the abortion for the low-income families, and promote safe sex and consistent use of effective contraceptive uses would be helpful to reduce the abortions. So there are also illegal forms of the sexual behaviors related with the social problems. So prostitution is a part of the illegal sexual behaviors, that selling sexual services for the pleasure of the customers. So some people, or conservative or religious people, believe that prostitution is like immoral and prohibited by the law. But feminists point out that there are various violences related with the prostitution. So the prostitution should be illegal in the United States. But there are some other people that we should have some legalization of prostitution, because legalization will help the other people for the supply part or the demand part. The prostitution in the U.S. So once it was legal in some times, but early 1990s, sorry about the typo here, early 1990s, but large amount of shutdown was the legal brothels for the prostitution happened after 1910s. So no one knows about the exact size or number of prostitutes, but estimates indicate that U.S. have around some 500,000 of the prostitutes. So in 2010, there were about 63,000 arrested for the prostitution, and women accounted for 69% of arrested, so which is a large part. So customers are less likely to be arrested. So this is kind of the gender inequality in the prostitutions. So types of prostitutes, there are various types of prostitutes, but the street workers are the bottom line of the prostitutes because their life and their welfare level are very bad for them. So they have a much worse lifestyle and the life condition than other types of the indoor workers. I mean indoor prostitute workers. So studies found that indoor workers have very similar level of the self-esteem and other health conditions compared with other non-prostitutes. So it's very surprising because we usually imagine about the prostitutes such as the street workers or call girls, but the other types of the prostitutes have some similar level of the health condition compared with the non-prostitutes. So motives of prostitution. So money is a major motivation for women who become prostitutes. So they have some like a better source of income for them. For the women who are usually poor, have lower level of skills. So if they have like a leisure jobs, they may not earn that amount of money. So this is kind of the major motivation for a woman who starts the prostitution. So high proportion of the street workers have for poor family and the social background a high risk of the mental health problems. So it's not very clear then those problems cause the higher chance of the being a prostitute, or those type of the being a prostitution may increase those risk of the health problems. So this is the cause and effect issues in here. And there are some gendered view about the sex with the prostitutes. So there are more negative views of the sex of the prostitutes compared with the sex of men or with the prostitutes. So there are three sociological theories about the prostitutes. That functionalism say that prostitution is functional because it provides some resource for the woman as the income source, and sexual alternatives for men, and even lowers the divorce rate because it's kind of outlet for the man, so men can be more familiar or can be better for the family, and it lowers down the divorce rate from their findings. So the conflict view sees the system as the prostitution reflect the economic inequality for the woman, because if women feel compelled to become prostitutes because of their lack of the economic condition or economic sources. And feminist view criticize objectification of the woman as a sex object is for the man's pleasure. So it was partly true. So around the World War II, because many husbands or boyfriends died during the World War II, so many poor women feel compelled to be prostitute to support their family or to support their life. So it was partially true after the World War II, but in these days, yeah, partially true or partially not true, because not every woman become the prostitute because of their economic condition. So symbol interactionism may explain the justification of their sexual behavior. So they insist that prostitutes perform very important service for the pleasure of the customers, and males can relieve stress and can be better for their family. So there are many ways to deal with the prostitution. That there are also debates that how much degree the government need to prohibit or ban or control the prostitution, because prostitution may be very harmful, but it also be some like a very personal issues. So they work for their personal pleasures between the suppliers, I mean the prostitutes, between the customers, usually men. So it can be some like a personal relationship, personal issues, but it can have some other problems such as widespreading the sexually transmitted disease or other problems. So also still prostitution victimizes and objectifies the woman, so it's a problem, but there are also other occupations victimize the employees. So prostitution is illegal, but some other occupations such as dangerous jobs like coal mining things or even the fire workers, they are endangered of the life or their health, but these are the legal. So there are more harms than goods in their perspective, but it's not clear what amount do they have some more harms than goods. So it's very not clear. So legalization or maintain illegalization of prostitutes is like hot debate in the current US. So pornography refers to the printed or visual materials that are sexually explicit and that are intended to arouse sexual excitement than artistic appreciation. But you can see that so many words are not very clear. So how much degree explicit or how much degree is like just sexual excitement? than artistic appreciation. So, for example, if the nudity is the very artistic appreciation, it may not be considered as pornography. But if just a woman explicitly and just intending the or releasing the nude for the intended for arousal sexual excitement, then artist proposes. So it's very hard to evaluate the degree of the artistic appreciation or sexual excitement then. So it's very hard to define the pornography in the simple words, but still there are many magazines provide pornography in the front, such as Playboy or other magazines. But there are so many controversial debates that nudity from the National Geography or Playboy may have some different perspectives in terms of the pornography. So public opinion towards pornography is that opposing the pornography is more prevalent for the more religious people or older. So some other part of people say that pornography is very helpful in reducing sexual violence is like that. So 31% of public thought that pornography should be illegal. 65% or 4% of people think that pornography would be legal for the people over 18 years old. So more people think that for the adults, pornography would be legal. Women are and more religious people are more likely to protest or oppose about the legalization of pornography and less likely to watch X-rated videos very naturally. So effects of pornography. So there are some positive and negative effects of the pornography. So it may increase or cause the sexual violence such as rape and sexual abuses because many types of the pornography make the false fantasies of the aggressive sexual behaviors and very tough ways of the sexes. But it's possibly true or not true because it may cause a violence against a woman, but it may reduce the violence by providing sexual outlet for males. So may exhibit some more hostile attitude toward women, but it may not have long-term effect from the viewing the pornographies. So dealing with the pornography. So it's also a controversial issue. So how much we need to prohibit or ban by illegalizing those pornographies. So if we need to legalize or illegalize the pornography, where is the starting point of the pornography and where should we start for the illegalization of pornography, such as do we need to ban the magazines or some streaming services or other printing services? So it's not very clear because there are a few studies. I mean, there are very little number of studies dealing with the pornography or prostitutes. So it's not very clear where is the starting point or which extent or how much we need to ban in terms of the pornography or prostitutes. So we should, but anyway, in some parts or any parts, the pornography increases or causes the sexual violences. So we should keep our efforts to enhance the equality between men and women because pornography usually objectifies and the woman as the object for the man's pleasure. So in some part anyway, pornography should be dealt with the law or by the government. So yeah, so I covered about the daily assignment and the responses. So make sure to submit your assignment by the today, August 7th. So feel free to let me know if you have any other problems and let me know if you have the video quality problems as well. Okay, thank you and see you tomorrow.